All right, we're at in our work study hour now. Did we? So we lost Lamouette, huh?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, he's definitely a coach level participant.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It would have been nice to have him stick around to give
Yeah.
a little guidance. But um, you know, my thought is, uh, I think if well, we should probably, with Daryl and Audie on the line, go over what our thoughts were for this session. Oh, and Gary's, I think he's kind of familiar. Do you want me to kind of review what our discussions were earlier, Jim, and um, about
Um,
blockchain art?
well, let's hear from Daryl. See what he's here for.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you, Daryl, since you moved. You've been skipping out on our meetings.
Yeah, sorry, Jim. Yeah, it hasn't been intentional.
I
But
guess it's
yeah,
kind of early for you now, huh?
it is. No, well, it's 1:07 p.m., so it's not too early at all.
No, I mean our 10 o'clock on Wednesday scheduled meeting.
Yeah, so yeah, that one is kind of an awkward time for me because that's when I'm getting my daughter ready for school.
Yeah.
So that's tricky.
So we'll probably cancel that.
Or if we could move it, that would be great.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's doable for you, but
What town did you move to, Daryl?
I moved to Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada.
Oh, okay.
It is a city in central British Columbia, population of about 150,000. It's beautiful here. I love it already. It's great.
Cool.
You know, you have a lake there, right?
Yes, the Okanagan Lake. It's nice and clean. And
Are you near the lake?
yes, we're actually a 7-minute walk from 3 different beaches.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty sweet.
So you're in Pacific time, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll figure out a time. So you just stopped by work study now to see what was going on, or is there something you're interested in learning about?
I just thought I'd drop in and see what's going on. I just haven't been around in a while in your world much, so just thought I'd kind of chime in and see what's going on.
Have you been following the blockchain art stuff at all?
Not so much.
No.
Not in the last few weeks, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff. You know, art's a good use case, and it certainly, you know, music is an art use case. So it's 100% applicable to your stuff on RChain.
Right.
If we, okay, what we were looking at was this, the artist reserved rights transfer and sale agreement. And we were looking at maybe creating a simple contract for an art object, and that's what you wanted to do this hour, was sort of develop the requirements for that?
Yeah.
And I don't know about Eric. Can we get Eric now? It would be, I know Eric is busy at 3 o'clock, but can we get him at 4 o'clock? Is the question. I will.
You want to try? Yeah. Now, that artist rights document that Jim is pulling up, I got a sense that was more for visual arts and not necessarily for like for music. So, I'm getting into a space I'm unfamiliar with, but that was my impression. So, yeah, but so I think with Eric's effort, Eric Drayson, he's creating with the digital art object framework is more for visual arts as opposed to the music.
Yeah, I didn't think there was anything specific about the kind of art, whether it was a physical art object, like a painting, or whether it was, a movie.
Well, so this would be a question for Daryl then. So Eric's creating in his scheme of things. An artist creates a work of art, so it's a digital art piece. He sells it to someone, and in that process of selling it, well, so well, now I'm already getting in over my head. Jim, we were talking about this 15%, and that 15% is not on the initial sell of the art object. It's on every subsequent selling of the art object. Is that correct? Or maybe Gary can answer that. Because if a artist has a piece of art and they sell it, I create something and I sell it to you, then I'm going to get 100% of the proceeds. So that's with that first transaction. Then Jim, you now have the art piece that I sold you and you want to sell it to Gary. When you sell it to Gary, you get 85% of that transaction, and 15% of that transaction comes to me as the original artist. So that's how I'm thinking through this. So as far as requirements gathering.
Okay, so you have a use case, okay, which is you create an art object and you sell it the first time.
Right.
Okay, and then another use case where you buy an art object and you resell it again.
Okay.
Okay, and you have this idea of a percentage.
Okay.
Okay, there's other things that you have. Besides the royalty, so to speak. You have exclusive, non-exclusive. You can have all kinds of conditions in this. In this contract, and then you have derivative works.
Well, with this first case, with this first prototype that we're trying to create, I think we want to leave out as much complexity as we can.
Right.
We need to keep it simple with the goal of actually getting something that works. Right. So with the idea is I'm an artist. I create a art piece, a digital art object, right, and I sell it to you. And you pay me $100 for this digital art object. Now, as I'm the artist, I get 100% of that payment, of that transaction, or as my royalties. My royalties on that first transaction is 100% or $100.
That may be. Eric has also talked about the object itself acquiring value.
Yes, that's true.
You might leave 15% of that in the art object itself, in the contract.
So I think we should have, and that may be scenario 2 or scenario B, but right. I think in with the goal of simplicity. So the first scenario A, we want to keep it as simple as possible. So not only where it can be easily coded up, it can easily gather the requirements, We
Right.
could easily code it up in Rolang, and then scenario B and C would add an additional level of complexity. So this is what I'm suggesting for scenario A. I'm the artist. I create a digital art object. It's a picture. It's a picture of my workspace or what of something, and I sell that picture to you, and you purchase it for $100, and that's my royalty. It's 100%. So now that's the first transaction. Now the next day, Jim is now the owner of the art object. He owns the certificate of authenticity, which
But I'm not
makes
the original owner.
right. But I have sold when I sold you, and this is what we're doing is requirements gathering right now. We're actually working through the requirements. When I sold you that image, that picture, I sold you the picture, and I also sold you the certificate of authenticity. You need to have both. If you do not have the certificate of authenticity, you cannot sell that image to Gary because it has no value.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the way I look at it is we gave you the capability to do a resell of that item. Okay.
Okay.
And in order to have that capability, okay, in essence, the authenticity, whatever it is that I gave you the capability to resell, has a certain provenance.
Right.
In that this is how I got it.
So
And these are the claims that have been signed about it. It has an identity.
right. So that was day one. We just walked through what the transactions that transpired on day one. Now we're into day two. Day two is different. And in day two, now Jim, he owns the art object, and he also owns or has in his possession the certificate of authenticity. Jim is now going to sell that image, my image that I created, to Gary. Gary, and he's going to sell it for $100. Now, when Jim sells that image to Gary for $100, so Gary gives Jim $100. Jim retains $85, but $15, 15% of that transaction comes back to me as the artist. So that's day two. And when Jim sold that image to Gary, so Gary got both the image and he also received the certificate authenticity. So now Gary has both. And actually the certificate authenticity is a component of the image. They're tied together. So what makes that image worth $100 is the fact that Gary has that certificate of authenticity. Now Gary
I'm not
wants,
sure, I'm not sure what it means for him to have it. He has the capability to resell it. Okay, and what it is
well,
determined by its certificate of authenticity.
okay, well, let's create day two in a different scenario. So Jim, you're selling the image I created to Gary. Gary has the image, but he doesn't have the certificate of authenticity. You have the certificate of authenticity. You did not pass that along to Gary. Now Gary wants to sell that image to Audie, he can sell it to Audi, but it doesn't have any value. It's no longer worth anything.
The certificate of authenticity is a public thing. Everybody has it. Okay, it isn't. Uh, um,
So the certificate guarantees that the object is the object?
right.
Yeah, and it guarantees that everyone is abiding by the rules of the smart contract. Now, perhaps if there was something nefarious that happened in a future transaction between two individuals, the artist has the right to negate, to strike down their certificate of authenticity, saying, I'm not sure of the exact words. What's the word when you I renounce. I renounce their certificate of authenticity, and this I do not no longer stake claim to that as an artist, to that art object. That art object now has no value. So the person who owns that art object, if they try to sell it to someone, and the certificate of authenticity has been renounced by the original artist, by the artist, that owner cannot sell it because the certificate of authenticity has been negated. So
the artist has some type of control over the future use of this art object in perpetuity, basically.
yes. So, and I wasn't aware of this, but if you go into an art gallery, with all the pictures on the walls and so forth, if a gallerist or someone was doing something nefarious, and the artist of that picture, decided, hey, I don't like what you're doing. I renounce that I am the claim to that work of art that I did. And when by doing so, that art piece no longer has value. And Eric has there's a terminology for this, and he's said it 2 or 3 times, and I don't have what it is, but this world of art are assets, and assets like a stock or a bond or real estate, but it's different. This asset of art is different in the sense that the artists in perpetuity always retains that right of association. So they have that right of renouncing that asset, and by renouncing it, it strikes down any value that it has. So that's how this world of art is different from the world other assets in the world of stocks, bonds, real estates, and so forth. So, and this was enlightening to me. I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, this is news to me as well. I don't really understand how it's possible.
So, and this is how I think the world of visual arts is different from the world of musical arts or audio, where, if someone has a song, they can still listen to that song. It's still, well, I'm not going to, but yeah, it's so so in this effort of working through the digital art object framework, as a group, we're getting up to speed on how the world of art functions. What you know you know these the legal aspects that go on behind the scenes. So and Daryl, if you have interest here, let me and also in the collab blockchain art channel, I posted a link here. Let me get this link here. I'm going to post it in. So bear with me here. So here's a link to our blockchain art folder. And in there, and you should be able, it's a shared folder, so you should be able to get access to it. Eric, he posted 2 or 3 documents yesterday on artist rights, the history of this world of artist rights. And I just read maybe the first page of it, but I'm looking forward to reading through them. Each one is about 60 pages, but it goes into everything we've just kind of discussed. The history of it. How did this world of art and as an asset and ownership, and what the artist can do in renouncing how this came to be. So once I kind of read through this, I'll be able to have sort of this domain that we're working in. So we're working in this space of visual arts or digital art objects, and then out of that we're going to be creating the requirements for this first scenario A, where I take a picture, I'm the artist, and I sell it to Jim, and Jim pays me $100 for that image, and so forth. So that's going to be an example of a use case in this world of artistic rights. So we're just,
I think we have one use case where the burden is put on the reseller, or the value is given by the reseller who gets it out there. He gets the 85%. And then we have another use case where the value is in the original artist, and 85% goes back to the original artist, whatever, as another use case. But digital rights management is not new. Okay, and it applies to all forms of music and recordings, and it's I guess Daryl could talk more about digital rights management schemes that are out there, but if you don't have a legal copy of something, it's not supposed to play. In a sense, that's the idea, but.
Well, I think the world.
The thing is, if you play it anyway, it's bootleg. It's not the real art.
Yeah.
Almost like having a forgery of a painting, whatever.
Yeah.
In this case, we have what defines the art is something that we're going to have a million use cases of. We're going to, the simple case is we take a hash of the piece of art, and that hash represents that art. Anything with a different hash is not that art. But not that simple. We can have something that looks the same, feels the same, sounds the same, everything the same, but has a different hash.
So let's work through what Jim just said. So and we've actually been doing this. So Gary has a picture of the Starry Plowman. It's a flag. It's a flag of a plow with 4 stars. That image of the flag is on the Keybase file system. And so let's see here. So Gary uploaded that image to Keybase. And Keybase, as I understand it, is a distributed file storage. So now that image, the actual image, is somewhere out there. I guess so. It's on, it's in multiple computers. It's a distributed storage. Now, then what Jim talked about is That image, we run an algorithm and we create a hash, and I don't know how many digits it is. Say it's 20 digits long of numbers and letters. You know it, and that hash is created. And if you run this algorithm again on that image, you get the exact same hash, the exact same. So here's the image. This is the starry plow flag. And Gary did this. He ran an algorithm, and he created a hash of 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 20 digits approximately. Now, if someone were to uh, and if you run that algorithm again, you get the exact same hash. But if you add in a sixth star to it, if you change that image a little bit, you're going to get a different hash. If that image is changed in any way, even with a pixel, that 20-digit hash of numbers and letters is going to change. Is going to be dramatically different. So that's the beauty of what a hash does. So now we've got the image stored out just in Keybase, distributed on a distributed storage. We have that hash, and okay, and so this is where we're at. So that's our first hash of the actual image. Now we need, and then we talked about the hash. The next hash we need is of the certificate of authenticity, and we need to educate ourselves on what are the criteria or details that go into this certificate. And once that's created, that gets hashed. So that's a second hash. So that, once again, that's going to be approximately 20 digit long number of hash of numbers and letters. And if that certificate of authenticity is changed in any way, that hash is going to be totally different. So now we've got two hashes: hash of the image, this starry plow flag, hash of the certificate of authenticity. And now we need a third hash. And the third hash is those two items together, of the starry flag with the certificate of authenticity together, creates a third hash. So that's how I understood it from what Eric was talking about, that he wants three hashes.
Well, the provenance has to go in there somewhere. So that could be part of the certificate of authenticity, which really talks about the transfer rights that you've been granted when you purchase it.
I think
These
that
are the programs that are associated with the item.
That's the art object. That provenance is the art object. That's the smart contract. So the smart contract that governs the starry plowman flag. So this is where it gets a little complicated. And it took me a couple weeks to get through this next concept. So everybody saw that image of the starry plow flag. Now we're going to create a smart contract in Rolang, which governs what is going to happen with that starry plowman flag. What's going to happen is that smart contract we create, that now becomes the art piece and not the flag. And this is where this is an understanding of what the art is. It changes, because we're conditioned to think, oh, I'm looking at the starry plow flag, that's the art. piece. Under what we're trying to do, it's not. It's the smart contract that governs what you're going to do with that flag is now the art piece.
Okay. And the other thing, Daryl, that a number of us have been looking into is how that relates to that the ownership of the art piece is associated with some sort of utility. Ownership of any property is represented by capability, something you can do with the object. And these are the capabilities that you're given, or the electronic rights. And the electronic rights concepts go back to Mark Miller from the 70s. The guy that coined the term, or one of the guys that coined the term, smart contract. Okay, we have this recent video, Higher Order Smart Contracts Across Chains, which is the title of this, but it's very much about what property is, how we define property. Let's see, where did I put that? I got it in the blockchain art channel here. But this gives a lot of the history about it, about Mark Miller, which is pretty interesting. And he has other things that are more on point with respect to
Jim. My thought is if we start getting into Mark Miller, that's way ahead of what we're trying to do here. I think for art on the blockchain, if we start introducing Mark Miller and some of his ideas, that's going to be outside of the scope of our prototype.
Well, I think we should at least, this is mostly about what is property and how do we define property. And this is very much related to, important to the notion of art. I don't think it's a distraction.
Yeah, but well, here again, I think what those three documents, and I haven't read them yet, but when I do, artist rights are different from what I think what Mark Miller is talking about property rights in a general sense. So I think what we need to do, or at least for me, for my homework, is to read those three documents that Eric provided. Right. And when we talk about artists' rights and artist property, it's going to be, if it's not in one of those three documents, then it's not in our domain.
Yeah. So, well, the whole point that Mark Miller is making here is that what defines property has not been determined yet. And if we want to know what rights, a tribe on the Amazon has to their land, well, we have to find out. It's not something that's preordained. So what he talks about here is contracts that are in the process of becoming, that we're constantly stretching what it means. We're creating the art in terms of what the property rights are and what the utility of those rights are and what the options are, what you get for $1 and what you get for $1 million. Yeah. I think you can come up with something very concrete, but that's not what these property rights are about. They're not concrete.
So
They're
here's
something that it's part of the art in creating these things that control the art.
so here's my thoughts. So this session, and we're doing exactly what I had hoped was, and hey, and Daryl, I'm glad you're here because this forces us to break down what we've been talking about, trying to learn from Eric from the past 2 months to be able to explain it to you. And if we can't explain it to you, then that means after 2 months we still don't understand it. So by me explaining to you helps assure me like, okay, I understand something. So we're gathering by talking through this, we're working through what the requirements are. So in the blockchain art folder, we have the artist rights articles. So that's the domain that we're going to be working in.
And
now,
so if I can just interrupt, so those documents are essentially explaining how the law works right now in regards to art?
Exactly, and how it came to be. Apparently,
Okay.
this is something that was created in 1971, and this is how the system works. And outside of that, that's what I gather from reading page 1, and I've got 59 more pages to read in order to be able to talk intelligently on it. So that's this world that we're working in now. Once and every and I think those of us involved in blockchain art, once we kind of work through that, if it's not in those documents, it's outside of the scope of what we're trying to do. So, and then that's step 1 is creating this domain. Step 2 is a use case. That use case we walked through earlier where I create an image and I'm selling it to Jim. And I get for $100 and that royalty comes back to me. That's day 1. And day 2 is Jim sells it to Gary. And for $100, $85 goes to Jim and $15 goes to me. So this is that first use case. We got to keep it simple because we got to be able to explain it, whether it's to you, Daryl, or to an artist or so anyone else. So I think, and once we kind of, I'm going to create a document to kind of outline what these requirements are. Eric's got to kind of look through it and say, well, you guys are kind of right. You got to change this or you got to change that. So we're still have to check this out with Eric to see if he's driving the discussion as far as pointing us into the direction that we need to go. And
so, he's looking at a situation where the original artist may get nothing.
Exactly. That's what's happening now. And I don't have a specific example, but there's artists that are out there who they've created a piece 30 years ago, and now it's selling for $10 million. And the owner sells it to the next person for $15 million. So that owner made $5 million on the sale. The original artist in that transaction gets 0. He gets nothing. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. Under our scenario, when that transaction happens, the person who owns that art piece, who sells it who bought it originally for $10 million and then sells it for $15 million, that $5 million gain, 15% of that would go back to the original artist. That's the world we're trying to create.
Right. And and it's really a very simple recursive contract, but it's a little more than Steve was saying here, because on day 3, Gary sells it to you, Daryl. Okay, and he keeps 85% of it. Okay, and then 15% of it goes back to me, and 15% of that goes back to, wait, who created it?
That's who's the artist. Whenever we talk about these scenarios, we have to identify who is the artist, because we need to
And
say,
who's the previous owner? Well, we'll see.
well, and that's who's the previous owner, right? So you got to know who are the characters in your story. Who's the artist? Who's the current owner? Who's the buyer? And you got to know who is who in order to understand where you got moving pieces, but you got to know who is who in the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to distributing the object capabilities, according to the electronic rights protocols, the
Artist reserve rights transfer and sale agreement.
yeah.
Okay, this has been floating around in the art on the blockchain channel, and I think this is Eric's prototype for sort of what we're trying to do. And notice it up here, it says the agreement is designed to give the artist 15% of any increase in the value of each work each time it is transferred.
Ah,
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, I was kind of missing
It's
that part
very
of it.
specific.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. The agreement is designed to give the artist 15% of any increase in the value of each work each time it is transferred in the future. So, okay.
Yeah, it gives, there's a lot of other restrictions on the thing. I mean, it says the right to borrow the work for exhibition for 2 months every 5 years at no cost to the owner.
Mm-hmm.
The right to be consulted if repairs become necessary. Half of the rental income paid to the owner for the use of work at exhibitions.
Okay. And that example that I gave earlier isn't exactly correct, because when I'm the artist, I sell my image to Jim for $100. Okay, I get that $100. But when you sell that image to Gary for $100, if you sell it for $100, which is the same amount that I sold it to you for, that's no increase. So there's no increase in value. So increase in value would be,
you know, we could model our agreement after this, like this one says, you know, half of the rental income paid to the owner for the use of the work in exhibitions. This would be uses of the work that don't require transfer of ownership. So this is actually bigger than our little 15% of the increase in value.
So the owner, so the artist not only gets a predetermined say in what they get as the property value increases throughout ownership, they also get a say in how the art is being used.
How it's being used, and 50% of the revenue that it generates, if any. And with digital rights, I mean, you know, the sky's the limit on how many different permutations we can massage these contracts.
Right, but this is a very specific.
Yes,
contract.
exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
that's for a
Yeah.
specific purpose. Okay,
But
and
our
probably
idea,
not the contract that you're going to want to use for, a CryptoKitty or something.
no, it's not. But Eric and Steve are right. These give us the idea of what is involved in transfer of artist rights.
So this is addressing not the it's addressing the increase in value,
right.
but it's not addressing the proceeds or the sales amount. It's as if the ownership is 100%. You know, you're not diluting
Yeah.
the ownership by allowing the three of us to have it at the same time. Only
But
one of us has it at a time.
when we write these things digitally, we can frame the contract any way we want to, for
Right.
any purpose. This one here for a physical work of art, they get 50% of the rental royalties. I mean, that's big. So if we said you can allow people, huh?
What do they get here? They only get 15% of any increase.
Of the increase, right? If there's no increase, then the artist doesn't get a percentage.
Yeah, but look down, like 7 dots. Half of any rental income paid to the owner for the use of the work at exhibitions,
Right.
if there ever is any.
Sure, but I'm speaking, and those additional caveats are for I think future examples, or scenario B, scenario C, and so
Yeah,
forth.
those are where we get into licensing of the work
Right.
of art, and licensing, relicensing, and reuse of the digital art,
Right.
which is probably bigger than the sale.
And for scenario A, this first example, this prototype to show that this works, to show that to go through the whole mechanism, my suggestion is that we just use that first line only of 15% of an increase uh, of the sale goes to the original artist. So there's two. And so when we're thinking about the smart contract, the artist creates the artwork, and then there's that initial sale. That's day one. So the artist gets 100% of the proceeds, and then now that new owner who owns it, when that new owner sells that work of art, then we come into that top sentence of when there's that increase in the appreciation of that artwork, then that artist gets that 15%. So
yes, and in the framework of our Art on the Blockchain project, the way I'm envisioning it, I'm not sure everybody's on board with this, but I see the project itself, having a work as its goal, and then that work being owned by the members of the group, or of that particular Art on the Project blockchain project. The contributors own it, and what I'm envisioning is that their shares of ownership for any of these future contracts where revenue is generated is determined by the distribution of the community currency.
Right. It's all of the contributors to the artwork. Each contributor contributed a different level of value, and it has to be, that level of value has to be identified.
Yeah.
And that contributor is reimbursed based on that level of contribution. But I think that level of complexity, we talk about scenarios, that's going to be scenario L, M, or N. We're a few iterations down the road. So, but I think at least in my mind, this discussion has helped me work through of what the requirements are, of what that first example of what this should do and how it's going to work. So and we're making progress.
if I can go off mute here, and we're coming up to the top of the hour in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
What do we have? 2 new messages. These notes are really great. Thanks for saying it. Makes me feel like something's been happening. Do we have a video from yesterday?
No, I recorded it, but it's on my home computer, and I left. I'm on the other side of the bay now, so I'll post it when I get back. But I made a note to myself to post it.
All right. Yeah, you've been really doing a good service. You know, I mean, everybody's supporting your note taking, Steve.
Oh, I appreciate that. Hey,
you know, all the projects.
yeah. Well, hey, if I just turn off my video, turn off my sound, and just sit there at the keyboard and tap away, I'm good. So, and it forces me to keep track of the conversation. So, yeah. So tomorrow is Wednesday. We have our member hangout. So we'll reconvene. I'll see everyone tomorrow during the member hangout. So.
Okay, and you know, I don't know if you want to try to take a crack at the user stories.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm gonna. Okay. Now that yes. So let me. I'm gonna first do write up a Google Doc just to have it there, and then I'll put that on my to-do list to think through what the user story would be. So that'll be a good exercise, and that's that link that you posted in Discord.
Well, it has the user stories for a wallet.
For a wallet, yeah. So that as an example, that they can kind of give me guidance.
Right.
So okay, so that'll be
and
good.
Of course, a wallet is the other project we're working on.
Exactly. Yeah. So sounds like a winner.
Yeah. So I put that in the DApp developer channel.
Okay. Good deal.
Okay, so I'm going to take off.
Yep.
All right. See you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Gary.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks,
Have a great
Daryl,
day.
Hadi, Jim, Steve.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.